Everybody, good evening and welcome to our second live stream and the first one on my channel. And hello, Dom, thanks for joining.
My pleasure.
For those of you who haven't seen the first one, maybe Dom, you can quickly introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Dom Robinson. My YouTube channel is Deep Wreck Diver. I'm a UK-based technical diver. Most of my diving is in the UK, and the thing that I particularly like to do is deep exploratory diving. And one of the great things about the UK is we've got so many shipwrecks around our coast, and the waters are at a good depth for technical diving. So there's a whole load of exploration still to be done. So many wrecks, and that's fantastic for people like me.
All right. So for those of you who haven't seen Dom's channel, please check it out. I've seen all his videos. They're amazing. It's actually it really takes you on his journey, and I enjoyed all of these a lot. So check it out and then subscribe. And the reason for those of you who haven't been aware of this so far, there was actually, I think it started with a video on Dive Talk, but we started at some point to talk about, and people thought that we were very different opinions on certain things, and then we figured out that we actually get along quite well and actually look forward to finally dive together. And then somehow we started chatting and made the first live stream basically to explain this. It was rebreather bailout scenarios, and then people liked that a lot, and we said we'll make this a regular thing. So from now on, once a month, we will have one of these live chats. One time on Dom's channel, one time on mine. So we basically back and forth. And then there will always be a second video where we answer questions that we could not handle during the live chat, because obviously we see a question, we start to answer it, new questions popping in, so you cannot answer all of them. So we try to keep this around about an hour. And so there will be always a second video where we try to catch up with this. And today's topic is CNS toxicity.
Just before we go, I'm entirely sure we're on the right one, because the one that I'm looking at has got 15 people waiting. So I think maybe you might have created another one rather than the scheduled one.
Actually, I don't think so. 3 waiting scheduled for May 18th. So I have 22 people here joining.
Okay. Maybe everyone's just joined on this one, but
and let me just check that. And sorry for everybody watching. This is me being stupid with this computer stuff. But no, there's only this one. Yeah, no, I think actually everything's working as it should be. So it's 23, 21. So, and there's now questions coming in. This is awesome. Once a month, we get insight into some of the great divers. So thank you very much, Eric, Stefan Held. You have 2 live streams announced. Thank you very much, Stefan, for telling me, but where are they? So let's just have a look at that. And maybe while I try to figure that out, you can.
I'll tell you what. I'm in the chat for the other live stream. So I've just put a link in there. So hopefully people from that one will come and join this one. So hopefully we'll get everyone in this one.
Yeah, the funny thing is, if I go to my videos, I only have the one where we are in there. So I don't have anything else there. So but if you can do that, that's awesome. And I promise I will learn along the way, and this is probably just startup problems. But I should probably take a proper course with Gus and Woody. Let them explain to me how this is done. Let's see. So there are 2 investment page. Okay, now I see that as well. I have told the others to change the stream. Okay. So I hope people will figure that out and come to this one. Yeah, actually 27 now. I think numbers are increasing. So again, sorry for this one. We'll sort this out the next time. Need to investigate a little bit why there were two. I actually set up only one, but probably my fault. So today, CNS toxicity. I'm not even 100% sure how we got the topic. I guess somebody asked about it, right?
Yeah, it's come up a few times, I think, hasn't it, in different chats, and it is a really interesting topic, I think, because of the emphasis that is placed on it in lots of technical training programs, lots of kind of advanced nitrox courses. People talk about CNS clock a lot, but then when you look at people who do really long duration dives with high PO2s, you know, anybody who does the maths all of a sudden realizes that clearly there's something going on.
Something's wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. So probably what we should do, I think the reasons for this discussion is exactly what you just described. You have all the written information that basically it looks like everybody copied from everybody else. So from the beginning there was, we think something's wrong, and it just kept going, and it's in every manual. So it started with the math behind, which we will talk about in a minute, and then also the symptoms, the convented thing. And then on the other hand, what you just described, we have the real life experience where we realize that if you do certain dives, by the math, you should be dead, and you're not. So there's obviously quite a bit of discrepancy between between reality and what's written in the manuals, and I think that's what people get curious about. And so let's talk a little bit about that. So what's your thoughts? I mean, how do you handle your CNS on your dives? Because I mean, you typically, most of the dives you do should be beyond 100%, right? Which is defined as the limit that you should not exceed.
Yeah, for certain. And, you know, I think almost all my, you know, any dive above maybe 80 meters is going to exceed 100% CNS. And the bigger dives, you know, the 130 meter dives, those sorts of things, you're getting close to 200% CNS. And, you know, what do we do? You know, I think people probably know what I do. I have a PO2 at the bottom of 1.3. I then come up to my first deco stop and I put it up to 1.5, and then I run 1.5 all the way for the rest of the dive. So that will push your CNS up, you know, to kind of levels beyond which are considered okay in the literature. And, you know, what do I do about CNS? I basically ignore it. My handset will, my shear water will warm me at 80%, and my inspiration will warm me at 100%, or the other way around. I can't remember which way it is. And both of them are just suppressible alarms. So they'll come on every now and again, and I'll turn them off, and I'll just ignore CNS. So that is really what I do about CNS. The thing that I am careful about is PO2. So the actual PO2 is something that is, I view as important. So I know people who will run 1.5 on the bottom. I know people who will go above 1.5 on deco stops. For me, that is a far more limiting factor. So I you know, I will only push my PO2 up to say 1.5 once I am in a position where other risk factors are reduced. So for instance, you know, on a deco stop, for instance, you're not going to be working hard, or it's unlikely you're going to be working hard. So therefore, that's a risk factor. And that's one of the, you know, by that reducing, it means I feel I can push my PO2 up higher, for instance. That would be an example of that. But yeah, essentially that's what I do. Now, I know you have a very different approach.
Yeah, true. But I think actually, I'm not sure if everybody's on the same page here with how this is calculated. So if it's okay for you, I would just, for those who are probably not totally aware with it, just briefly run through the concept, how it is written in the books, if that's okay for you. So the general belief, and that's what you basically find in every manual, it doesn't matter which agency, which course, is that there is a CNS clock running if you elevate the PO2 that you breathe above 0.5. So And then this clock starts to tick, and then you have a certain limit, which is based on the exposure and the time. And the limit says 1.6 is 45 minutes, 1.5 is 120 minutes, and then from there on, it's every step. So 1.4 is then 150, 1.3 is 180, and so on and so on. And so if you exceed these 100%, then the belief is that the chance for a spontaneous oxygen poisoning is much higher than before, right? And if you stay below this 100%, then basically you're safe. And then on the other hand, what is also always in these manuals, and I think it's important that we quickly talk about it because this is also indicates where this is coming from. It's this acronym CONVENTED. So when there's this description of symptoms of oxygen toxicity, then you always have convulsions, visual disturbance, hearing irritation. So you hear a strange sound, twitching of the lips, dizziness, disorientation, stuff like that. And when you investigate a little bit further where this is coming from, then you realize it comes from a time where technical diving still was a lot of very, very deep air diving. And if it was helium, it was these homeopathic helium doses, like 15% helium in the mix or something like that, because the belief back then was that if you do a lot of helium in your mix, this goes much faster into your tissues and it's harder to decompress from, which is wrong. But that was the belief back then. So you tried to keep the PO2 quite high. So a PO2 of 2 at the bottom was absolutely something that I saw a lot of times. It's like, oh, we keep a high PO2. That means less inert gas loading, which means better decompression afterwards. And so you had these divers that came out from these dives and they reported symptoms. And when you look at these symptoms from today's perspective, then you realize that most of them are related to narcosis. And from the few cases where we had people that survived oxygen hits underwater, we know that there is basically no symptoms. There is no pre-warning. So it's like somebody turns a switch and you go into convulsion. But the two cases that I know, people that I also talked to, they said there was nothing weird or something. They basically can't remember. It just was instant. And so obviously a lot of this information that we have in all these manuals seems to be wrong. So first of all, the symptoms, which we think there is basically no symptoms. Second, the limit of 100%. And then most probably the way of calculating it so that it starts at 0.5, right? So actually we believe that it starts somewhere between 1.0 and 1.2. And if you calculate it that way, actually the more extreme dives that we do became way more reasonable regarding the CNS numbers that we see in the end. So not to be the teacher here, I just wanted to make sure everybody knows what we are talking about and why we may question it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. If you look at some of the, particularly some of the cave diving expeditions, you look at the kind of, the level, the run times that they do, and let's pick the wet mules, for instance, in New Zealand, where they go and they do 16-hour dives in freezing cold water, and they're changing rebreathers and they're in habitats and all those kind of things. I have no idea what the CNS they come out with, but it must be like 1,000%, something like that. Must be incredible, mustn't it?
I can remember that if somebody's here that knows better or I'm wrong, please correct me. But if I remember correct, back in these long color dives in Florida, and I was lucky enough to be on a few of these as a little supporter. I can remember there was something like 10,000 CNS after these world record dives. If you calculate it in a conservative way, like it's in the books, and that's actually what makes you scratch your head. Like, okay, the limit is 100%, and these guys have a couple of thousand, and they are fine. So obviously something's wrong. I mean, it's not superhumans, right? And yeah, that makes it very questionable. And that brings us back to what you said initially. I mean, how do you handle it? You said you'd simply ignore it, which I'm not sure if we should give that out as advice.
I don't know.
I mean,
I'm not telling people to do that. If I'm simply saying that's what I do, but it's not just me, because all the other people I dive with are doing exactly the same. And actually, because diving in the sea, which is mainly what I do, doesn't lend itself to the kind of run times that you get in caves. What I do know is that people in the who are doing the cave diving are doing far more extreme CNS, getting far more extreme CNS numbers than I am. So that means I'm relatively, confident that I'm kind of okay. But I'd come back to that point about PO2. The actual PO2 number, I think, is the thing that's important. So if you to go on YouTube, for instance, you can find some experiments that the American Navy did in the 1940s, where they were actually pushing up PO2 and everything until they eventually got guys to have CNS hits, and you see them having them, and they're absolutely horrendous, but they're at relatively high PO2 levels, and obviously individual variations and circumstances, and luck of the day and all that kind of stuff is all a part of it. So what I think we as technical divers need to be doing is you can probably get away with 2.2 PO2. You can probably get away with maybe even more than that. But the day that you can't get away with it, it's going to be really bad news. So you want to be staying absolutely away from that kind of stuff. And the way to stay away from it, I think, is 1.3, in my view, has got a really good body of not scientific evidence, but anecdotal evidence, in the sense that, we know lots of people who've done lots of dives with 1.3 PO2 as the bottom. And by and large, I'm not aware of many O2 hits amongst those. I'm aware of, sometimes people getting whole body oxygen toxicity if they do, repetitive dives over long periods of time. But as long as you manage your actual PO2, I think you're probably going to be okay, safe from a CNS hit.
So actually, again, we are very much on the same page here. I completely do the same thing. So I stay away from high PO2s, actually way more than you do, because I usually keep my bottom PO2s. I actually sent you this document a couple of days ago. I don't know if you had a look at it. But so if I do deep stuff, I usually keep my bottom PO2 around 0.8. So way lower than what you do. And then actually I increase my PO2 over the course of my ascent in steps. So I then go back to 1.0, 1.2, 1.3, and I also end up with 1.4, which probably gives me a lower overall CNS percentage, but actually gives me a little bit longer decompression. Sorry. And what you just said was the OTUs, the overall oxygen toxicity. That's actually something that I experienced. So a lot of repetitive oxygen rebreather diving over a couple of days, multiple dives per day, and then actually I had symptoms. But that's probably something we should talk about separately. So interesting question, probably also for all the people watching. Did you ever had any issues with oxygen toxicity?
Yeah, I mean, I guess people will put in their their own thoughts or whatever. Interesting enough, there's just a question there, which is guys talking about MOD. Maximum operating depth is exaggerated as a concern. I would no. I think it's really important that you understand that MOD is a really important point, because MOD is related to PO2. So the absolute PO2 and MOD are clearly linked. So if you bust your MOD and your PO2 goes up to 1.8, 1.9, 2 bar or whatever, you are dramatically increasing, I think we would both agree, the risk of a CNS hit.
Yeah, so you should not exceed your MOD, and you should know how to calculate your MOD. For me, the MOD, I think actually I made a video about that at the channel a while ago. There is still discussions what MOD is. So is it 1.6 or is it 1.4, for example, for a bottom gas, and 1.6 for a decompression? I've seen actually all kind of different explanations. So, but in general, you should never exceed 1.6 in your dive. I mean, that's something that I think we can point out there as a rule. And on your bottom gas, you should basically not exceed 1.4. I mean, if I saw the question here correct, the question was on recreational dives. So on a recreational dive, 1.4 at the bottom is something that is acceptable. That's actually also taught by quite a few agencies. On a technical dive, I would actually stay away from 1.4 because the loading is then quite fast. And then if you have to spend time on elevated PO2s during a decompression, your loading might become really, really high. And so why take the unnecessary risk?
Yes. So we've got a question in here from 391 Wombat, which is a great username. 391 Wombat. He says, what, if any, is the connection between MOD and CNS toxicity? So I would say in very simple terms, CNS toxicity is a way of measuring oxygen exposure over a period. So over the period of your dive, for instance, whereas MOD is almost an instantaneous thing. So it's to do with, what is the partial pressure of oxygen at this moment in time on your dive. Now, obviously, if your PO2 at a moment in time is high, that will increase your CNS toxicity if you stay there longer. But I think the point that we're making is that we don't have much confidence in the methods of calculating CNS toxicity. So I basically have none. I have no confidence in them. But PO2 and MOD, those are really important concepts. And if you calculate your MOD based on 1.4, as has just been suggested, or worst case 1.6, then you should take that number really, really seriously. You shouldn't be going beyond it unless you've got a particularly good reason. And if you do go beyond it, you need to understand that there is a fairly seriously increased risk of getting a CNS hit.
Yeah, absolutely. There was just, so I'm struggling without glasses. Achim, you fly a lower PO2 so you can spend more time doing your favorite part of the dive, your deco stop. Yes, exactly. Exactly. No, actually, the point here is, and I'm not disagreeing with you. I mean, it's just different concepts. But my highest fear would be to run into a PO2 issue at depth. So being at 120 meters, for example, and then figuring out, that was too much, you're dead, 100%. I mean, that's nothing you can survive. So I just feel more confident and more secure and more comfortable with a low PO2 at the bottom. And in fact, I don't mind the deco stop. So my times diving super cold water for extended times are over. So you will not get me in one of our lakes at 4 degrees doing hour-long decompressions. I'm simply too old for that. But if I'm somewhere nice, warm water, Mediterranean, whatever, and I hang in the water for 20 minutes more, I mean, I like to be underwater. It's always something to watch, always something to see, something interesting. So I never really understood this this urge to shorten decompression stops, and that for a while that was a big thing. So I was 5 minutes faster out than you. So what? You liked it better above water than underwater, then why do you dive? So that was something I always had an issue with. So I sometimes, I mean, my deco's over, but I see something interesting. There's some creature swimming around or whatever, or I simply like the blue water and just hanging there, and I spend 10 minutes more or whatever. It's not uncommon for me. So, yeah.
Yeah, and to be honest, that's and doing more decompression than you think you need is always, if you have the time and you have the gas and it's not impacting on other things and you're happy to be there, that's not a bad principle, is it?
Absolutely. And then, I mean, there's a few things that have to be taken in consideration when we talk about these concepts. I mean, you, for example, normally dive in a team. A lot of time when it comes to these kind of dives, I'm diving alone. So again, I have to also think how to not stress out my body over a certain limit, so to speak, because I have to handle myself and my equipment and the boat and everything afterwards, usually on my own. So that's all things that I have to keep in mind when I plan my dive, and also the level of exertion and I mean, everything in this dive is based on the fact that I have to rely on myself. There's a lot of times nobody there that can give me a hand. And we already talked about this when it was about rebreather bailout. It's just a different concept. It doesn't mean it's better or worse or whatever. It's just a different approach.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in the water by yourself, that is a risk factor, isn't it? So
Yes.
You know, by being there by yourself, you are increasing the risk, because having other people around you is always, you know, if you can, is a useful thing. So you mitigate the risk.
Can also increase the risk.
Yeah, by you know, having lower PO2s, which is absolutely fine. I mean, there's a couple of questions that have just come in here, actually, and a couple of observations as well. There's a gentleman here who's just said that they had they were diving on deep air and they started to get a few spots in their eyes and also tingly teeth. Now I know several people who've done the deep air and started to get the you know, it's one of the things, supposedly metallic teeth is what it's been described as. I've never had it, but I have heard that is it was well known for those who did deep air back in the day.
We both never did deep air, right?
Yeah, it used to be a big thing in the UK. You know, you would get people doing 70 or 80 meter dives on air, and you know, even you know, some more. I mean, I think Sheck, I think did he do 110 or 120 meters on air or something insane like that? You know, absolutely.
Yeah, actually, if I remember correct, he did the survey of Eagle's Nest at 110 meters on air, and the map is still accurate till today or something like that. So, I mean, for me, this deep air diving as a discussion is always dangerous ground, because I always are afraid of encouraging people to do it, especially now high helium. Actually, I see here that it became more popular again. So when I was a young guy, when I was 20, deep air diving was big. There was a lot of ego, a lot of like, we can do this. A lot of like, well, there is no helium or we can't afford it. And then actually it shifted, and at some point it was more like, deep air diving is stupid, let's go helium. Now, as really expensive and not everybody has access to a rebreather, I can actually see a move towards people seeing this again as somewhat acceptable, especially in a not that deep range. But I mean, for a while 30 has to be trimix, so now actually I can see up to 60 air is fine.
Yeah.
It's more like an excuse thing, so I'm really careful on talking about this deep air thing, because I don't really endanger himself. And also I, as a young man, did a lot of stupid things, and obviously also a lot of way too deep air dives. Today you will not find me deeper than 30 meters on air.
Yeah, okay. I mean, my approach is a bit different to yours on that one. I've done lots of 50 meter dives on air, and I would quite happily do 50 meters on air. But you know, that's, I guess it's about my own tolerance for risk, and that's you know, I prefer not to. You know, there's lots of much better ways of doing it. You know, rebreather with helium mix is a far more sensible thing. But it's, you know, I guess it's about your own individual approach to risk. I think the great thing now is there's so much information out there about it, isn't there? And that people know, you know, the benefits, you know, things like gas density, things like oxygen toxicity, you know, these things are all talked about, and therefore, you know, hopefully people understand that deep air diving is just, you know, not a good idea, really. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting question here actually from Eric, who said, when you guys are decompressing, can you tell your nitrogen offloading is complete? Is it something you can feel, or do you see something on your computer change? Well, I think, Eric, I mean, the important thing to remember, of course, is that there is no such thing as a no decompression dive. You know, every dive has decompression. Yeah. Now, some of it, the decompression isn't done in the water. Some of it, the decompression is done on the surface. But you are always decompressing. You know, and you will. So your nitrogen loading won't return to ambient until, fairly, even on a shallow dive, a fairly significant period after you've left the water. And on the kind of dives that we're talking about here, the deep decompression, the deep dives, all that is happening is, for me anyway, my computer's making a judgment on when it is tolerable, the risk is tolerable for me to get out of the water without me getting bent, but my tissue loading is still really high, and I'm still, I'm off gassing for a long period of time afterwards. So, having said that, I have dived with somebody who's done a lot of deep diving and is, quite well known in the community, and he has a belief that he knows when it's time for him to come up to the next stop, and he believes that his body, it's to do with his loop volume in his rebreather. He knows when he's he's stopped off gassing helium and he can come up another 3 meters. I'll be honest, I'm not convinced personally, but he's done lots of deep diving, far more than me. Works, and clearly it works for him. So, yeah, and I know other people who use kind of really old tables, and they base their entire diving off that. But and obviously, there are a whole load of different techniques for managing a decompression. I don't know. You're more of kind of ratio decompression sort of guys, is that right?
I definitely don't dive with a computer. That's true. So I sometimes use a. I mean, if it's really deep stuff like the last deep thing with these spells, I use a computer to plan the dive ahead, so to get an idea. But I definitely don't have a computer underwater that tells me like, okay, your stop's over, now go to the next one. So I have a plan and I can adjust it according to bottom times. So if it's shorter, I can adjust. If it's longer, I can adjust. And it also gives me more of a chance to say, like, I think this is not good yet. I stay a little bit longer. And I had that. So things that the computer may not take into account. So I feel that I'm exhausted. I'm cold. I simply don't feel well. So that always gives me the ability to adjust to this feeling, because obviously I know my body best and better than the computer would do. But on the other hand, I know that this takes quite a bit of experience as well. So for a new diver, that's probably not a smart idea. It's something that you should gain over time. But on the other hand, you should not start your decompression diving with hour-long decompressions, but you should also start to get a feel for your body. I mean, how do you react to decompression? So I actually had a student years ago that got bent during his open water class. So he got a level 3, so inner ear decompression thing on a 9-meter dive. I was like, what? And then like a year later, he came back to like finish his class and he got it again. So that back in the day, that was one of these incidents that taught me like, hey, be careful. Like everybody should take a slow approach to this and see what the body's doing. So you don't want to do ridiculous bottom time and then figure out with 2 hours of decompression ahead of you that this is not for you, that you just simply, your body can't stand it for whatever reason. So to build a little bit of confidence and experience, and then slowly start to build on that and actually do deeper and longer dives.
Yeah, and it's all part of that. I mean, I same as yourself, I know people who've got bent on really shallow dives. The guys I know have had a guy with a lung infection, and got a really, really nasty bend on a 10-meter dive. I think it's some days it's your body, that particular day, the world is against you. It's one of those things. It's not an exact science, is it? There isn't a mathematical formula you can plug all these things in. So I think it's Simon Mitchell is, I think one of his famous quotes is, "We're doing the right amount of decompression, but for the wrong reasons," which I have to say, I think sums it up really, really nicely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can also, there's dives that I did like, I don't know, 10 times and everything was fine. And then I suddenly were like, oh, my elbow is hurting, something's wrong this time. And it was the exact same depth, the same time, the same gases. It was just one contractor that made it not good on this day. So that's just can happen. And actually, I always tell my students when it's technical classes, if you do more extreme technical diving over a longer period of time, you will get into some sort of issue with decompression. That doesn't mean you have to get bent, like you have to go to a chamber. I mean, some serious type 2 issues or whatever, but there will be these dives, and I'm pretty sure you can agree on that, where you get out and you're like, today it was not that good. So I actually have broke my shoulder a couple of years ago, like 16 times, so it was completely smashed. And that's like a weak spot in my body. And when I have bad decompression, I always feel it in that shoulder. So yeah, then usually some more liquid and a little bit more oxygen usually cures that. But it shows me that that was not optimal. And on another day, the same dive might be perfect. So there's so many things that actually contribute to that. That, as you say, it's just not a complete science.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so there's a very good friend of mine last year who was working quite hard on a kind of 55-meter dive, and he also managed to flood his suit as well. So his suit was getting full of water, and it's quite cold. And then he got up to his decompression stops, tried to turn on his heated vest, and his battery was dead. He then had 2 hours of decompression to do. He was freezing cold. He had a high nitrogen loading, high CO2 loading as well because of all the work he'd been doing. And he completed all his stops, got out of the water, was absolutely freezing cold, and but cleared all his stops, and then got onto oxygen because he knew there was a risk. Drove home, got most of the way home. His oxygen ran out on the way home, and then sort of 10 or 15 minutes later, had a really bad bend. He lost eyesight, he lost use of his limbs, and really nasty. I mean, he's fine now. Got to the chamber, all okay. But I think he'd done a very similar dive to that a few weeks before with no issues whatsoever. And according to the science, he'd done all his deco stops. He shouldn't have had a deco problem, but because of those other factors, the cold, the high workload, all of those things obviously, meant that he was a higher risk. And, this is all the stuff that's taught in any decompression course, isn't it? You are taught that decompression is a whole load of different factors, and there's a roll of the dice in there as well, isn't there? Whether that bubble gets stuck in your brain on that, is just small and big enough to get stuck, or whether it gets stuck in your shoulder, like you were saying, or whatever else it is. There's an element of misfortune in there, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a similar story from actually some super high personal stress, emotionally, family thing, and then did a dive, and on top, so coming back after long travel, going on the boat, and then figuring out my dry suits are messed up, and then wet gloves, and then an 80-meter dive, 4 degrees water, and then already freezing on the way down, and guess what, on the way up, exactly the same thing. So these things just happen.
Yeah.
I just saw a question there that I didn't understand. When you are decompressing, you have a high nitrogen load, and when you get to a particular depth, there's an ambient pressure where every gas is neutral. That probably is beyond my English. Do you understand what Eric's asking here?
Yeah, I think the thing there is you're into half times there, Eric. So you are correct, is that if you were to go up to a particular depth and spend long enough at that depth, all the partial pressures of everything would become whatever the ambient is. But obviously that's not what happens on a dive. You don't your first decompression stop, you don't wait for all the tissue loading to get to hit ambient pressure, because you'd be down there forever, with slow tissues in particular. You would never, it would take hours to do it. So what you have to do is you're always chasing if you're using a Bullman algorithm, for instance, you're chasing the M value all the way up, or if you're using gradient factors, you modify the M value, whatever that modified value is, you're chasing. So you're always, for each, tissue compartment, your gas pressure for each, for helium or nitrogen or whatever, is above the is above the ambient pressure, and you go up all the way up till you get out of the water. So even once you're out of the water, your tissue loading will be far higher than ambient pressure, and it will gradually reduce and reduce and reduce. But it's to do with half times of once again, if you believe the Bullman model, it's half times of tissue compartments and individual gases and everything. So it's not the case that you get everything the same at each depth, then you move up to the next level and you get everything the same at that depth, then you move up. That's just not the way it works.
Yeah, exactly.
So actually another one from Eric then, which says, do you take temperature in account when decompressing? If so, what is it? Colder, longer deco times or shorter deco times? I mean, for me, I think this is it's a relatively new thing. I think the importance of body temperature in decompression. I think it was, the evidence has only really emerged in, I don't know how many years, but the idea that, the ideal dive profile is for you to be warm throughout the dive. If you're kind of cold all the way through the dive, that's kind of okay. What you don't want to be is hot at the beginning of the dive and cold at the end of the dive, because that's the worst possible situation for getting rid of gas. That is, of course, what happens on most dives, because you get in the water, you're swimming around at the bottom, you're warm, you then come up to your deco stops and you sit around doing nothing for hours. You are cold. So it's your body, the blood isn't moving around as much. Your body's not as warm, so therefore you're not getting rid of gas as quickly as you would, you want to. That's why I think things like heating systems are really important. And I mean, me personally, I never put my heating system on at the bottom of the dive. My heating system only comes on when I'm on my deco stops, because I want to try and get to that point where I'm warmer on my deco stops than I was at the bottom of my dive. That's my strategy.
Yeah, that's also what I always say. Don't use the heating as an additional comfort factor, but never rely on it, because exactly what you described. And then when you get cold, the blood vessels shut down. Basically, it would call for more decompression, but you're cold, so actually you want to get out of the water earlier. So actually, that brings you into a really bad spot, so to speak. So yeah, actually, it is a very high contributing factor for sure.
Yeah, so that's why, I mean, if you were to look at the wet mules, for instance, the team, for those of you who don't know the wet mules, by the way, they're absolutely bonkers. They're guys in New Zealand who they've done. They're the guys who did the first hydrogen dives. They do 16-hour run times in 6 degrees of water, 230-meter dives. What they have for their decompression, though, is I think at 40 meters, they've got a habitat. They swap from one rebreather to another rebreather, and then they've got another couple of habitats as they go up shallower. And all these habitats, they've got things like heating in them. They've got light. They're actually out of the water, obviously, because it's habitat. And all of these things are just mitigating risk factors that you get for doing that kind of duration of dives and that kind of temperature of dives as well. I mean, the basic problem with it is still the same, though, because they're going to 230 meters and essentially all they're seeing is some wet rocks. And it's kind of like, why on earth would you do that? But that's my prejudice.
Never found a bell in a cave, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, what it does is, they are absolute extreme examples of some of the things that we talked about earlier on. Now, there's a question here from Louis, who talked about, he I think picked up on the fact that I said I have a Shearwater and Inspiration handset, and you said that you don't use a dive computer. So it'd be really interesting to kind of talk. He's asking about our individual, what instruments we carry with us on our dives.
Yeah. So for me, I have a depth gauge, bottom timer, whatever you want to call it. So basically, I have depth and time and a compass. And if I dive a rebreather, then obviously something that reads my cells, so I know my PO2, but that's it. So I'm not running an instrument that's calculating my decompression. I have to be fair on this last deep treasure dive that I did. I actually had a Shearwater with me that was running decompression, but basically just because I wanted to know, it was more like a backup. because the dive obviously was a bit more extreme with 6.5 hours of total runtime. But I did I had a plan for this dive, and I also had a plan of how to change that plan if I change my depth or if I modify my depth or my bottom time. So in fact, I did. So I was planning for 20 meters at 160, and I did 14 at 170 or something like that. And so I was able to adjust that underwater, but I'm not running a computer. That's hopefully answers the question.
And I think this comes to a point that we've hit on in a couple of our chats, isn't it? Which is that we both do different things, and they both kind of work for us. So my strategy is completely different to that. My strategy is totally different. So my strategy is I have two computers. I have a decompression computer on my left wrist, which is the controller for my inspiration. So 2020 handset. It's running a Bulberman ZHL 16C algorithm with 1995 gradient factors. So that's and it's obviously monitoring the PO2 on there. So that's one of my dive computers. My other computer on my wrist is I've got a Shearwater Perdix 2, which is standalone, so it's not connected to my rebreather at all. And I have a 60-80 gradient factor on there, and I use that. And obviously, if I change the PO2, I change the PO2 on my Shearwater. And it's my Shearwater that I use to control my decompression, because I know that my inspiration will clear a lot earlier than my Shearwater. But if I ever need to get out of the water really quickly, I can use my Shearwater. Sorry, I can use my inspiration rather. So it's a totally different strategy, and and they both work for us.
Absolutely, and I'm sure there would we could have probably a third person here with a complete different approach that also works. So again, there's nothing wrong with that, or it's just a different way of doing it, which is completely fine.
Yeah, so I have another guy. I dive with another guy who's been doing who's done some really, really serious diving. He has a set of slates that he's got from somewhere. I don't know how many decades he's had them, but that's what he does. And he goes, "What's the depth of the dive?" And whatever it is, he'll pull out his slate and he'll go, "Right, that's my bottom time, and that's how much deco I'm going to do." And broadly, he'll stick to it. He's got an inspiration handset as well. And as far as I'm aware, he never looks at it other than to check the PO2. And that's his approach. And once again, he's done some really, really serious diving. So there we go. Different approaches.
Absolutely.
So somebody's asked about isobaric counter diffusion, which is an interesting topic.
Yeah, and I have no real answer to that. I personally don't really believe in it. And I mean, there's very, very different opinions on that, depending on whom you ask. But I actually don't really have an opinion on it, to be completely honest. I don't know. What's your point of view?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting one. I think the jury is still out as well. And do you ever swap diluent when you come up on your dive? Do you ever so for me, I have a 3-litre cylinder of air on my rebreather, which I use to run my wing and I use to run my suit inflate. What I have done on some dives, particularly the deeper ones, is I will get up to my first decompression stop at say 40 odd meters. I will do a dill flush using my air. So I'll get rid of as much trimix as I can, and I will change my handsets to an air diluent rather than trimix diluents. And doing that will save you quite a bit of time. Now, if you do the maths on that for the isobaric counter diffusion, it's pretty insane. It's like 3 or 4, depending on the gas mix, 3 or 4, different on a PN2 rather. And, obviously that's well above the recommendation of a half and all those kind of things. So I've looked at it and I've decided that I'm not doing that anymore. So I have done it in the past, but I don't do it just because you do hear about people getting isobaric counter diffusion in chambers and all those kind of things. So I've decided not to do it, but I know it was a practice for a long period of time to do exactly what I've just talked about.
Well, I can tell you that when I still did a lot of deep diving, open circuit was, for example, when we used the 50-25 instead of a 50 nitrox to avoid the switch to this to this pure nitrogen mix with no helium in it anymore, to avoid that. But I could never really, to be honest, feel a difference. And on the rebreather, I switched diluents if the diluent's so extreme that that it's probably an issue breathing it in shallower depth. So on this last dive, the 170-meter dive, the diluent was a Heliox 6, and I switched to an 18. I think I switched to 1845 when I got to 60 meters or so. So just in case I need to go on open circuit, it's a more breathable gas.
Yeah. So,
and it also obviously keeps the PO2. It keeps it easier to maintain the PO2 in case you inject diluent in shallower depths.
Yeah. No. So that all sounds very reasonable to me. So sorry about that. We don't particularly have a good answer to ice about counter diffusion, I think, other than to say. No. It'd be nice for somebody to do a bit more research into it and give us all some answers. But as always with these things,
we could invite Richard Harris on this discussion. He could probably tell us more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that absolutely. I mean, these guys are absolutely the people to talk about this kind of stuff, haven't they? I mean, I think it came up at Rebreather Forum 4 without any particular firm conclusions on it. So there's a question. Somebody's asked us what gradient factors we use. Well, obviously. Lots of people posting their own particular gradient factors. But there's also why do we choose them? So clearly not a relevant question for yourself. But for me, I use 6080, and the reason I use 6080 is because the only organisation in the world that I'm aware of that's published recommendations on gradient factors is the British Aqua Club, and they. Got a guy called Gavin Anthony, who's relatively well known in this kind of field, to do a literature search, and he went through all the literature and had a look around, and that was what he came up with on the back of it. And they published it online on their website, and they say for trimix diving, 6080 is where you need to be. So that's kind of why I've gone with it. But I know obviously it's quite a contentious subject, and people have got lots of strong views on it. The reality, of course, is the thing like 50-75 or 60-90 or all those kind of things. The actual amount of difference it makes is relatively small. It's only when you get into kind of things like, I don't know, 30-90 versus 60-70 or something like that, you start to get really serious differences. So it's something that people get really kind of excited about and probably don't need to, in my view.
Yeah, I actually always have a little bit of an issue with people playing around with these things without really understanding the background of it. And I mean, obviously, as I just explained with my decompression planning, that is not really something that is bothering. But actually, the 6080 is something that I would also use.
Okay, there we go. And what's your rationale for that, by the way?
Actually, I know the document that you talked about before, and I think it's very reasonable. And also back in my GOE days, there was a lot of discussion about that, and that also always produced reasonable numbers. Let me put it like that. So what we did was, well, when we played around with this ratio deco thing, you obviously compare the ratios that you come up with different models. And then 6080 was always quite close.
Okay, there we go. So, but like anything with this diving, it's big boys rules. You make your own decisions. You have a look at it, and you choose something that works for you. I mean, so we got another question here about Eric again. What gas mixes do you use in your dill bottles? So, do you have particular ones that you go for?
I'm normally very close to what I use open circuit. So if it's down to the 45-50 meter range, it's 2135. If I'm going more towards the 60, 70 meter range, it's 1560. In the up to 100 meter range, 1080. And then if it's clearly deeper than that, then usually it's Heliox 6.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm clearly not on the best mix side, but on the standard mix side, which makes it a bit easier from the logistics. Yeah.
Yeah. So I use lazy gas. I tend to use down to about 70 meters. I'll probably use 1050, which is and the reason why I use 1050 is because it's easy for people to mix. For those of you who don't know, it's a simple gas mix for my local dive shop. Down to 85 meters, probably 1265, and then beyond that, so 880 or something like that, I guess, depending on the depth. I tend to use multi-deco for calculating my gas mixes, and I'll work on I want to get a reasonable gas density. I want a obviously decent MOD and all that kind of stuff, and decent equivalent narcotic depth. So, I mean, the other thing that I would flag up again is British Tobacco Club has published a list of recommended gas mixes for different depths, and that is something that I tend to use to guide me as well. It's quite a good bit of work. It was done with that chap I mentioned earlier, Gavin Anthony, so it gives you a few different options. And of course, the thing with gas mixing is it's not an exact science. So you've got to always accept that you might ask for something and you may end up with something that's a little bit different. So there's a bit of flexibility always required, I would say.
Content, then actually mixing it becomes quite difficult, but is a bit harder than if it's just a little bit of helium. So 2135 usually comes out super accurate, whereas mixing a 1080, for example, to the point is a little bit more complicated.
Yeah.
So Eric is keeping us busy here. Not using a computer, Achim, do you dive with a slate to know your deco stops? Well, that would probably of its own. Actually, I think there's a video on my channel where I explain that in detail. So I have a set of wet notes with me, and so I came up and I also teach a certain way of doing this ratio deco thing. So I have basically a table where I spread out my stops and then I start shaping S-curves if it's open circuit, or if it's rebreather, the S-curve doesn't make any sense. So then it's more linear. And that also allows me to quickly adjust if I change something on the plan. But that actually is too much for that video. But there is something on the channel. And I mean, if there's interest in that, we can always come back to that and explain that, for example, in a follow-up video, because then I can actually grab my wet notes and I show that in front of the camera to give you a little bit of a better understanding of that.
Yeah. I mean, it's great, and you do have a video explaining it, don't you? So, Eric or anybody else can go and have a look through that, and I guess ask any questions based on that. Okay. We've got another one asking: are any of us certified gas mixtures, or do we leave the hard work of mixing gases to the experts? So I do have a qualification to mix gas, and I'm an instructor and everything as well. I have to say I never used it very much, because it is something I always prefer to leave to other people. How about yourself?
So yeah, I'm instructor for gas mixing, simply because of the agency also, and I have my own mixing. I'm doing all of my gas mixes at home. So I'm mixing a lot, actually.
Okay. So I guess we're up to about the hour point there, mate.
Oh yeah, actually 59 something. Yeah, true. Yeah, let me just quickly scroll. So I think we did a lot of these. There's probably a few that we missed. There was actually quite a few maps. Actually, I think we're pretty spot on this time. Yeah, if there's nothing in particular right now, I think we could wrap it up for today. There's one more coming in. This is extremely informative. Dom mentioned he only has a handset connected to the O2 sensors. Is that correct? Would you just bail out in case of failure?
So
that's one for you.
Yeah. So as part of the process of getting a rebreather CE certified, it's got to have effectively 2 independent systems for monitoring the PO2. So the handset is one way of monitoring the PO2. It's also got a head-up display, which is some lights which monitor the PO2 as well. So if my handset fails, and I have had a flooded handset, in fact, I've had several flooded handsets, you can monitor the PO2 using the head-up display. So don't necessarily need to bail out. In fact, one of the occasions I did bail out because it actually shut down the rebreather. The other time I stayed on the rebreather and used the head-up display to monitor the PO2 and my decompression and all those kind of things. So I'm guessing you probably haven't done a CCR course, but when you do your CCR course, obviously this is part of the stuff that should be covered with you as part of your training.
Yeah, and then there's obviously also the gray area between bailout and staying on the rebreather. I mean, you can always go SCR, etc. So there's always, I mean, I always tell people the CCR obviously holds more adventures for you. So there's more things that can go wrong, but it also offers such a wide range of solutions for you. So till you really have to bail out, actually quite a few things need to go wrong. So there's usually a good way to still make good use of your rebreather, even if it is not functioning 100%. But the important thing is that you really understand what's going on in that machine and how this affects you. And that means you have to have serious training, and you have to dive it a lot so you're experienced on it, and not just once a year or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of the cost of ownership of any rebreather is getting yourself properly trained and then staying current on it. That is really important. And if you are thinking of getting a rebreather, or you have a rebreather, you know, if you look at people who've had serious mishaps on rebreathers, large numbers of them are because either they're diving with one they're not familiar with, either because they haven't done very much on it, or because they just haven't used it for a long time. That's really common. So, you know, you need to factor that in. If you've got to stay current, got to keep up to speed on.
Yeah. So Eric is just asking here, have either of you flown your units in SCR mode? Yep. Not only once.
So I've not had to do that, but that's because I'm not. I don't like SCR mode in a sense. So every time I've had a failed rebreather, I've been making an ascent, and I'm just not keen on it, because there's, particularly if you've got hypoxic mixes, there's dangers of, you know, ending up with hypoxia. So I've not done it, but obviously I know how to do it, and, you know, there are other circumstances when I would definitely give it a go.
So the interesting thing with the SCR mode is definitely in cave diving, when you have to still cover distance. Actually, what I wanted to ask you, how is did you start it on the inspiration from the beginning?
Yeah,
no, did you ever dive another rebreather?
I'm 100% inspiration. I've never been on another unit, so I'm kind of.
Oh, okay.
I've remained faithful. I'm
okay,
a one
cool. Yeah, because
guy.
I'm asking because I had somebody asking me, like, for a topic, the two of us, like, how did you start your rebreather journey, and through how many units did you go, and how did you build that? And actually, my rebreather journey is a bit wild, because I started really early, and I thought this could be a cool one. But if you started with the inspiration from the beginning, then that's a different story. So I thought you probably also started with something else and then made your way to the inspiration. All right. Yeah. I think we're basically done. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining, for all these interesting questions. Dom and myself will go through them once more and make a follow-up video on this, I guess, which that probably is a little bit shorter than the last one, because I think there's not that many unanswered questions. And then the next one will be on Dom's channel again. Do we yet? We have a couple of topics that we started discussing, and so yeah, we will see what we do next time. If you have things that you would like to see us talk about, then please let us know. Send us messages. We're super keen on that and very grateful also for the suggestions. And yeah, from my side, Dom, thank you very much for the time. I enjoyed it a lot as every time.
Yeah. No, so yeah, and thank you to everybody for joining us this evening or this morning or whatever time it is, wherever you are. It's great to have so many people on, and yeah, we'll probably do it. We'll do it in a month's time.
Yeah. So that was the plan. So once a month, and then so you don't have to wait so long in between. So probably in about 10 days, 14 days or so, we will have the follow-up video. And then we can probably also tell you what the next live stream will be about. And then obviously we will announce that in time so you can. But usually it will most probably be Sunday evening, right? I mean, that seems to work quite well.
Yeah. Probably Sunday evening about a month from now, but we'll let you know the exact date nearer the time, guys.
Okay, awesome. So thanks also for all these hearts floating in there on the discussion on the chat. So really hope this is enjoyable for everybody. And then have a great week. Have a nice evening, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.